Hey everyone, how's it going? Good morning, good morning. All right. How did you guys enjoy the long weekend? I'm doing good, Salva. Thank you for asking. It was a good break, productive, I hope. Practicing, yes, that's very good, yeah. When you get some time, it's always nice to start practicing a little and trying to catch up on things that maybe are lagging a bit or maybe get ahead. So that's always good practicing. Doing great. Yeah, Zubayd, I'm doing great as well. All right. All assignments complete. Yeah, that's lovely. That's what we like hearing. Now, I'm still waiting for more people to join because people are slowly joining. I'm gonna start the lecture in a bit. Till then, you guys can kind of gather everything. And if you want, so for today, what we're gonna discuss is we're gonna talk about debugging and we're going to talk a bit more about the conditional statements and everything, how to create conditions and how to make it easier. Because we have seen last week that conditional statements, they can get pretty long. Now, our goal is to make our code as simple as possible. So these are some topics that we're going to cover for this lecture. So I'm going to wait for a bit for more people to join. Till then, you guys can sort of think about it a little and let me know if you have any comments. Oh, congrats. You got a new laptop. That's amazing. Which one did you get? Hopefully no issues. Yes, that's perfect. Yeah, that's good. The new ones, they're pretty decent when it comes to heavy softwares, such as the IDEs. So that should be good. I believe you have already set up everything, Node.js and JavaScript in your new computer. Oh, that's great. That's perfect. Looks like you're all set for today's lecture then. All right. So let's slowly start going into the lecture. A lot of people are still joining, but I'll dive deeper later. But for now, let's kind of talk about a small overview. Now, what do you guys understand about debugging so far? How much do you know about it? Or how important do you think it is? Execute line by line. Yes, that is a way. Identifying where the problem is in a program. Yes, essentially debugging, what we do with that is we figure out where the problem in our program is. For example, if there's an error, the error is shown in the terminal and we get the exact answer of what the problem is. But in cases where, say, your program runs just fine, but there are issues where your output isn't quite what you were looking for. For example, maybe the while loop or the for loop becomes infinite and keeps on going without stopping. So that's something we can check by debugging. We can check if our variables are getting the values that we wanted to get, or we can even check if the variables are actually storing something, or is it just staying empty in general. That is something we can take a look as well. So let me share my screen. I have a code open already. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, so I have an example over here. This is just a random example, okay? So it just does a bunch of different stuff like adding numbers, squaring a number, showing the name of the user and all that. But now, before, when we used to debug, what did we do? For debugging, for example, if we want to see what the value of sum is, what do? We kind of just console.log and display it on the terminal, correct? We check it one by one. Does that make sense? Why do we check it one by one? What's the point behind it? Anyone? Figure out where the error is. That is definitely our main concern. But why don't we just do the whole thing together, and why can't we figure it out from there? Exactly, so that we know how the values are changing and which direction the program is heading. If I run the whole program, I won't be able to pinpoint the problem right away, right? In order to pinpoint the problem, I need to go step by step. For example, if I give you a real life example, say you're going somewhere, you're heading towards your destination, but you didn't actually reach the place you wanted to reach. Now, looking back, can you say right away, like, why you ended up in the wrong place? No, right? How do you figure out the reason behind you getting into the wrong place or you going to the wrong place? Retracking your steps, correct. Exactly. Now, my question for you guys is, now, in order to do that in real life, what would you do? Would you think of every step you took, or are you going to think of key points? For example, maybe, okay, this is where I have to take a right turn or a left turn. These are usually the places where we make mistakes, right? We won't make a mistake when we're going straight down the road. Does that make sense? So there's no point in checking every step of the way. What we do, we try to figure out some points where we possibly could have made a mistake or some points where there's an actual decision making going on. And based on those, we figure out where the problem is. Whether we had to go right, but we went left, is that it? Or we had to take a turn, but we kept on going straight. So this is a pretty simple real life example of how we debug situations or problems. Coding is the same. Now for this code, if I console.log after every line, does it make sense? No, right? We have to figure out which points are important. Let's take a look at the rock, paper, scissors game. Now, if I'm trying to figure out the values after every single line, it's going to take me ages to debug. Also, likely, I might get confused along the way. So what do? I figure out where possibly could I have made a mistake, where the program actually goes complex or does its actual job. Like declaring play as true over here is not really a task where people would do error, or that's not really one of the main functions or the main computing process of the program. The main computing process goes on in the while loop right over here. In between the if-else statements and the variables, maybe somewhere we could have missed something, or maybe declared something wrong. Correct? Does that make sense? All right. So this is to give you guys a familiar example, but let me go back to my initial one that was pretty simple, where we just add numbers and square numbers and all that. So what we do this. We console.log the variables and we see what happens. Let me run this. Node tr1. Okay, so if you see over here, there were no errors, so the program just went on to give me the whole output. Now, what if I wanted to see that what the value of sum is right after this? I just write console.log and sum, correct? I just want to see what the values of sum are. tr1. So over here we can see the variable sum is actually holding 8. Let's forget about the rest. Let's just think about the sum part over here. So normally this is how we would debug. But then again, this will always take a lot of time because you have to figure out where the problems are. Then you have to console.log one by one for each variable, which is not very time friendly, right? For that particular reason, we use a debugger. Luckily, VS Code has its own inbuilt debugger for JavaScript. Now, we will be learning that shortly. Before that, so that you guys don't get confused about the whole program, let me just give you an overview of what's going on. You see, there are some new concepts called functions. I don't think you guys have done functions over here before, have you? In our lectures? You got the overview, okay. Now, so you guys understand how functions work then, right? Functions are basically, yeah, Alim introduced it, that's great. Amazing. Why need to write console.log sum since 8 was already there? Oh, just forget about this part. This part, just forget about it. Imagine it doesn't exist. If it didn't exist and it was giving us an error, we would individually try to print this to see if the value of sum is actually what we expect. In this case, 8. Does that make sense, Najla? All right. Okay, so back to the functions. So what functions essentially do is that they make our lives easier in a way. They break down our program into small parts. Now, essentially, we are doing the same thing, but what it does, it kind of organizes it, right? So you see, when you organize your files, you put relevant files under relevant folders in order to make sense out of it later on. Now, it's kind of a very similar concept to that. We are essentially picking out small functions, small functionalities from the program, and we're labeling them and making small blocks where it only does that function only. Does that make sense? I need everyone to answer, okay? Oh yeah, for sure I can repeat. Yeah, for example, now how do we normally add stuff? Let's take this for example. Is the screen okay or do I have to zoom in a little? Okay. So we usually just use the plus operator. For example, if I want to do, say, 5 plus 3, the result's going to be 8, correct? Now, if I want to add two numbers, I'm going to have to do it again and again. For example, I want to add 5 plus 3 over here. 5 plus 3 equals to 8. Now, what if in the next line, say over here, I want to add 8 plus 6? I'll have to write 8 plus 6 again. That is time consuming, right? That takes up space as well. But what if we use this function that adds numbers? What if we do that? We just have to pass the numbers to the parameters and it does the addition for us. So we don't have to write a plus b again and again. Does that make sense for everyone? For people who were asking for an example, is this good enough or do you want me to give you another example? One more, sure. Okay, let's think of it about like, so it only works for numbers. No, it could be anything. A function essentially just does one particular job for you. That's what it does. So let's take this for an example, right? Greet user. Okay, so if I wanted to greet every single one of you, I would have to write console.log and then write down your name again and again, right? For every single time, I will have to console.log. Now, that is a very time-consuming process, right? Am I correct, guys? That is a very time-consuming process. So I have to write name and I have to greet you as well. So for example, I'll say hello. Hello, then name, yeah. So every single time I have to do this. But what if I use this function right here, the greet user function? All I have to do is send the name of the person and it should greet me the same way, right? Does that make sense? Questions, anyone? Okay, so let me change this. Let me, for example, write down const greet2 equals to. Okay, so now what I do, I just send in the name, which is greet user. And so function is for repetitive tasks. Essentially, you are correct. So for a calculator, when you do complex calculations, for example, okay, let's take this as an example, okay? Let me make another function over here. Subtract numbers. So let's make this function that just subtracts numbers. Does that make sense? So what can we do? I don't want to go deep into the functions concept because you're gonna get a much more detailed lecture about functions later on, but just so that you guys are clear for when I start debugging, I just wanna make sure you have an idea. So when I have to do this, for example, let's take this. 8 minus 9 plus 6. Now, say I have to do this particular task again and again. Now, for a calculator, this is something that we would put in, right? Now, the calculator won't add a minus sign, add a plus sign again and again when we do it. What is it going to do? It's going to use the functions. For example, in this case, it's going to use the sub function, which is sub numbers, and it's just going to take in 8, and I believe the number was, I don't know, 5. Okay. And for the addition, what we can do, we can put it under the sub numbers. So what's it going to do? It's going to first subtract the numbers 8 and 5, and then it's going to add 6 to it. So functions make your life easier in a way that you don't have to write down console.log again and again. Also think of it this way. When you're console.logging a particular line, it takes up space as well. So if you console.log again and again, it's going to take up space as well. The function takes up less space since it's just doing that one thing and you're just sending values to it. Does that make sense? Okay. If you guys have any more questions about functions, do not worry. Why the variable const, not let? Because we want to keep it constant. We don't want to change it right now. This is just to label it that it's gonna stay constant. Return. I didn't really understand your question, Habiba. So are you asking what it's gonna return or what return means? So I assume you're asking for what return means. I will. Just give me 1 second. For now, I'll just copy and paste the whole code in your chat box, okay? Since I'm doing the lecture right now. Here you go. Okay, so what return essentially does, it just returns the value. Return is a very important part of a function because what return does, it returns the value to you when you call the variable, when you call the function. Without return, it will return nothing. My assumption is return another option for console log. Not another option. I would say when you start using functions, that will be the only option when you're console.logging something. So essentially the function does the addition for you and it just prints it. You can print it through console.log. Okay, so let's not go deep into functions because we are going to get a much more detailed lecture about it. But I guess you guys have a very rough idea, do you? Of what's going on? Because that's all we need for this lecture, a rough idea about functions. All right, now let's get back to debugging. Now we know that for debugging, we have to do console.log again and again, correct? But let's not do that. Let's use a debugger. So right now I'm gonna introduce you the debugger that VS Code has to offer. So follow these steps carefully because this is important. To open a debugger, what you do, you go to the very left taskbar over here that has 5 icons, which is Explorer, Search, Source Control, and then you have Run and Debug. You'll always, like, if ever, just look for this small buck sign and a play sign if you're in a different environment or IDE. But for VS Code, let's just focus on this. So you go to Run and Debug. When you click on it, something like this should appear. And afterwards, what you do, you press on Run and Debug, and the debugger will be open. But before we start the debugger, let's first talk about where and what we wanna check. So remember I was telling you that you have to kind of retrace your steps. You have to look for key points where you might have made a mistake. For that, how do we make the debugger understand which points to check? In order to do that, we use breakpoints. So what breakpoints do, they run the whole program till that particular point and give you the output to that same point. Does that make sense for everyone? Is everyone clear about what breakpoints are? Any questions? All right. Okay. Can you please repeat that? Okay, so for debuggers, they need to, and now we know where we want to check. For example, if we want to check the value for sum, we will check it where? We will check it over here to see if the variable sum is getting the value. Now, how will the debugger know that this is something that we want to check? Yes, you're correct. Breakpoint will read only information from the lines above it. So yeah, like I was saying, we know that we want to check this line, but the debugger doesn't know. How do we make the debugger understand that you have to run till this point? For that, we use breakpoints. Is everyone clear about breakpoints? All right, now, how do we put in breakpoints over here? Yes, I am getting to the example. So by example, do you mean like a real life example, or do you mean how to do it on the VS Code? Zubaida, I believe you asked the question. Okay, let's go for the real life example. Now, okay, for a real life example, remember the example I gave you at the very beginning that you're going to a destination, but you actually reached the wrong place. Now, if you want to retrack your steps and see where the problem is or where you went wrong, you can't really, there's no point in checking every single step. You have to check key points. For example, when there's like a left turn or a right turn, likely there you could have probably made a mistake. You could have gone the other way. So we can use that point as a breakpoint. So we will check till that point if we went the right way or not. Does that make sense for the real life example, Zubaida? All right. So now you get the idea of where to put a breakpoint. We put a breakpoint in key points that we want to check. But in very simple terms, a breakpoint essentially just runs the code above it. So how do we put in a breakpoint over here? For example, let's see, I want to check out all the code before this line over here. So what I do, so when you scroll to the very left, do you guys see something like this pop up? So you click on that. You just added a breakpoint. So now the debugger will run the entire code till that part. Now let's create some more breakpoints. I want to check how the program is working till this line, like before this line. So I put a breakpoint over here as well. Now I also want to check how the program is doing before this point. So essentially I'm checking each and every variable. Does that make sense? So from 18 to 21, yes. So there is no need to write breakpoint. No. What it essentially does, you just put in this dot over here and it creates a breakpoint for you. Does that make sense for everyone? Can everyone see the breakpoints on the left? How do you stop? We will see that. Sorry, I missed it. Okay. So Ryan, do you understand what a breakpoint is? Okay, so you go to the very left, you see when you hover over these lines, you'll see this small red dot coming up. Does it appear for you as well? Okay, so when it appears, and if you want to create a breakpoint over here, what you do, you just click on it and the breakpoint is set. And if you want to remove it, just click on it again, it's gone. We'll run from 1 to 18. Yes, the first breakpoint will run the whole code from 1 to 18. Does that make sense for everyone so far? Breakpoints are clear? All right. So now that the breakpoints are set, let's create or open up the debugger. So let me show it again. Go to the very left to these icons, you see the run and debug part. Click on that and then click on run and debug. So for me, you can see the debugger already started. Okay, now let's see what each scope is for. Now, this one over here, as you can see, labeled very clearly, it's for the variables, right? So over here, we can see what the variables of the program are and what those variables hold as values. Right now, you see some as undefined, right? Why is that? Okay, so why is some undefined? Yes, exactly. I haven't set any values to it. I just started, right? So now, before I go to the code, I'll just show you how did you add all that information in the debugger. It automatically detects it. So what I did, I just created the breakpoints, and the debugger just automatically detects all the variables and the modules that you have. Does that make sense for you, Zoya? So technically, I didn't add anything over here. It detected on its own. For me, it didn't do that. It should, but if there are any setup problems, I can help you out with that during the lab. But for now, just kind of focus on the lab and see what I'm doing. Okay, so let's go ahead. So now we know where the variables are shown. What is the watch block over here? So if you have any variable that you wanna keep an eye on, you could just transfer it to here. Does that make sense? Now we will get to that later, but for now, let's just try to understand how the debugger is working, okay? All right. So as you can see over here as well, you can see all the breakpoints that you have marked. So line 20 has one, line 21 has one, line 27 has one. If you want to check, if you have a very big code and you want to check which lines have the debugger or the breakpoints, you can just check from here. Clear so far? All right, okay. So now you can see this bar over here. What does this bar do? This is essentially sort of like a control system for you. You can control the whole thing from this small block. This is the pause and play button. If you play this, if you press on this, the code will start running or the code will pause. This right here, it's the step over button. We will get into details later. Can you say it one more time? The loaded scripts part. Loaded scripts part? Which part is it you're exactly talking about? This, the variables? If it doesn't show this particular sign or it just shows the pause button, we'll get to that. But I'm just trying to figure out the question for Zubayd over here. So could you elaborate on the part where you said the loaded scripts part? Okay, okay. Essentially, yes. So let's see where I put the breakpoints. And did all the lines for you. Okay, so let's start from the top. Let's see where I put all the breakpoints. To make it simple for you, you could just check out the breakpoint section and you could see which lines have the breakpoints. So what breakpoints do, it runs the whole code before it. So if you put the breakpoint in line 20, it will run 1 to 19. Does that make sense? Okay, so now let's actually run the debugger. So let's do this. Let's press play. Over here, as you can see, we have the sum 8. So actually, what it did, it started from line 20. So when you, I think I said line 18, line 19, that's my bad. What it essentially does is it checks the whole code from line 1 to line 20. Now, if you see line 20, we added the numbers 5 and 3, and we stored it in the variable sum. As you can see over here, the value of sum changed. We didn't have to print the whole thing. Does that make sense for everyone? Can you guys are you guys following me right now? Everyone, questions? Did you see how the value for sum changed? We didn't have to do anything, it automatically did it for us. So now we know that sum actually has, sorry, did you get the control buttons to appear? So when you run and press on run and debug, it automatically comes up. It might show you, when you press run and debug, it might show you what kind of files you're looking for. For that, just make sure the environment's Node.js. Regardless, if there are any setup issues, I will help you out during the lab. But for now, kind of see what's going on and try to understand the lecture. What if that line skipped because the condition was not met and lines after it executed? So it doesn't really skip lines like that. If there's a problem, if there's an error, you'll be able to see it over here. It will run every single line. It does not skip unless you want it to. For example, if there was a if-else statement, I will get to that later. So if there was a if-else statement, if you want the program to go to the else block, it will go to the else block. Now we will get to that example soon, but first let's try to figure this part out, okay? So this is clear. We can see that the value of sum changed. Let's run it again and let's see if something else changes over here. Okay, so now when I run the next line, you can see the value of greeting over here, this variable, it changed to hello, John. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it went to the next line as well, and it went from this breakpoint to this breakpoint. So it essentially ran greeting and squared value together. So you see squared value changed to 16 because we put in over here the square of 4, and greeting changed to hello, John. Any questions so far? Any questions about the concept of how it's working? No? Okay. So now we kind of understand how the breakpoints and the play button works, right? So you set the breakpoints and the play button kind of plays for every single breakpoint. Squared value you see over here, it's a variable that we set to square the value of 4 or whichever value you want to square. Is that clear for you? It's a variable over here. Najla, is that clear? How it came out to 16? The square of 4 is 16, right? So when we pass the value 4 to the square function over here, it generated the answer for us and stored it in this variable. Does that make sense? Okay. So now we know how to kind of create the breakpoints and run based on that. Now, let's do it again. Let's reset it. So as you can see, again, how did I reset the whole program? How did I reset the whole debugger to go to the first line? I pressed this button, the do-over button or the restart button. Is that clear for you guys? All right, okay. So now the debugger is starting from the top. Now, let's not do this. Let's not run it right away. Let's try to actually debug what's going on. So now if you see, we are creating a sum, and what if the answer is not correct? What if 5 plus 3 is 8? What if it shows 7? That's the wrong answer. How do we figure out what the answer is going to be, or what the solution to the problem is? Because we are not really adding anything over here, are we? We are adding everything in the add numbers function. Does that make sense? Okay, but then how do we, because the debugger is now on line 20, how do we redirect it to that function and that function only? For that, we use this over here that is called step into. So what it does is it steps into the add numbers function. Let me click on this and see what happens. As you can see, it went inside the add numbers function to show us what's actually going on. In this case, we are passing 5 and 3. That means the value of A will be 5 and the value of B will be 3. Does that make sense for you guys? Questions? Everyone, is it clear so far? All right, perfect. But now, as we can see, we saw the details of the function, but we're kind of stuck over here. How do we go out? Or how does the debugger go out of this particular function? Can you repeat the last part, please? Yeah, for sure. Okay, so as you can see for this line, no problem. So as you can see for this line, we're supposed to add two numbers, but are we actually manually adding anything? We're just using a function, right? So do we actually know what's going on inside? Yes or no, Zubeda? Yes. Do we know what's going on inside? Do we? Do we actually know what's going on inside the function? No, right? We just know that we passed the value 5 and 3. That's all we know. But if we want to know in detail that what's going on inside the function, we have to step into that function, correct? Now I'm in line 20. How do I step into that function? For that, I use the step in button, step into button. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's do that. I stepped into the function. Now it shows me what's actually going on inside. So as you can see, we passed 5 and 3, these variables, these values to the function. Now the corresponding variables are A and B. So for A, what should the value be? 5. And for B, what should the value be? 3. Correct. And over here, we can see that the values passed are correctly stored. Everyone clear? Questions? Clear? Correct. Okay, great. Now we are inside the function. How do we go out of this? How do we step out of this function? We press on the step out button. Let's click on that. So you see, after we stepped out of the function, it took us to the next line, which is greet user. Now, over here as well, we are not really creating a console.log or itself, are we? Or we're not really creating a greeting itself. We're just passing the value John. Now, how do we see what's actually going on inside the greet user function? Everyone, step in, correct? So I step into the function, and over here, I can see what's going on. From here, we can see the string that we passed, John, it gets stored in the variable name, and then returns hello plus name. Does that make sense for everyone? Okay, so that's step in, step out for you. Step in, step out's clear? All right. So step in kind of goes inside the variable, right? But what if I want to run this thing line by line? I don't want to put breakpoints for. Sorry, can you explain step in, step out? Yeah, of course. So no need to be sorry. So what step in does, as you can see over here for this, okay, now Sandas, you tell me, for this particular line, line 20, we're supposed to add two numbers, right? But are we actually physically adding anything? Or are we just passing the values 5 and 3? We're just passing them. So do we actually know if it's adding it correctly? No, so we have to step into the function. We have to see what the function is doing. So for this, you see this button over here. This is called the step into button. We click on this and it takes us to the relevant function. In this case, it's add numbers. And on the left side in variables, we can see that the values have been passed correctly. So 5 goes to its respective variable, which is A, and 3 goes to its respective variable, which is B. Does that make sense? Okay, now once we're done with this function, how do we go back to where we were? So we press the button that says step out, and it takes us to that particular line. Now, what if we don't want to actually, so what if we, okay, what if we know what greet user is actually doing and we don't actually want to see what's inside, but we want to go to the next exact line? Do we have a breakout point in the next exact line? Guys, no, right? So if I play, it's gonna go straight to line 27. But I want to check line by line. Exactly. We press step over, it takes us to the next line. And as you can see, when I press step over, it just ran this individual line and the variable greeting, it stored hello, John. Does that make sense? Questions, answers, anyone, comments? All right. So that's essentially the icons over here. That's essentially all the debugger does. How you use it is up to you. Now, there's another thing that you guys might want to see. So for this example, the debugger's clear, right? Okay. So let's go to something familiar over here, okay? Let's go to the rock, paper, scissors game. So let's first figure out how it's working over here, how the rock, paper, scissors game is actually functioning. So at first, we set play as true, because if we don't, it's not even going to start the while loop. Then it goes into the while loop. We see over here, we have 5 maximum rounds, and we set the rounds left to 5 because we haven't played yet. We set the user score to 0 and the computer score to 0 because this is where the program is starting. Then we go into another while loop to see how many rounds are left. If the rounds are more than 0, the game actually starts playing. In this case, as you can see, it just prompts to choose rock, paper, or scissors, and then goes on to create a random number which is needed for the if-else statement. Because the rock, paper, scissors from the computer's part has to be random. We can't really set it like that. Then it's not really a fun game if we know what the next outcome is going to be, right? So the rock, paper, scissors, this part from the computer's end has to be random. That's why we use the random numbers to select this. And then we go on to take the user's input and then we compare it. So now if we try to debug this, how are we going to do it? First, we check out breakpoints. All right, now there are a few things that we need to know, which is we have to first see the first error that might come up is if the play variable over here is false, then it's not even gonna go into the loop. So we check this one first. Okay, so for most people, when you press run and debug, this is something that might come up. Okay, and when this comes up, what do you choose? Node.js. Does that make sense? Everyone? Okay, so it has to be Node.js, okay? So you press on Node.js. Now tell me something. Why did it not start the debugger? It's because the debugger doesn't know what to debug. Exactly, no red ball. So we don't have the breakpoint set yet. So we have to do that first. So let me set a red dot over here, a breakpoint over there. Exactly, we did not set the breakpoint. So let's set a breakpoint on line 7. Then let's try and check out line 10 to see what the value of play is. Then why don't we go for line 14 to see what these 3 variables are going for. And what else? What else? What else? We can put a breakpoint over here as well. To see what the user is actually inputting. Can we just check for the whole program? Yeah, if you want to check the whole program, you can just run it normally, but that won't give us a very decisive answer as to where the error is, or that'll be hard for us to figure out where the actual problem could be. So again, this code works just fine. There's no error, but I'm just showing you guys the process of how to do it, okay? So I want to check this line as well. So I put a breakpoint here. But there's one thing though about inputs. Now, while I was using this, I faced an issue, which is VS Code doesn't really let the debugger take inputs when prompt is there. So what we can do, we can just put this part. Again, I'm just repurposing this code. That's why I have to change a couple of stuff. When you guys are just debugging it, you guys probably don't have to do it. Console.log. All right. So that we just did. Afterwards, what we can do, we can take this off because we don't need the prompt. The debugger takes inputs on its own, doesn't really need the prompt. Okay, because the debugger doesn't interact with the user like that. We are essentially using the debugger for our own use, correct? Does that make sense for you guys? So for user input, you could just keep an empty string. That works as well because we are going to take the input from the debugger. So now for the next line, after every input variable, you put debugger over here. Does that make sense? Questions, anyone? Yeah, you could, but it's just gonna, override it anyway. So you could just leave a empty variable over here. That's not a problem. So we put in debugger over there because the debugger doesn't take user input from the terminal, because the debugger is interacting with the code itself. So the debugger has to take the input from the debugging console. That's why we write debugger over here so that the debugger can interact with the person using the debugger to test in order to take the input. We will get into details. Okay, so what the debugger does, the debugger essentially stops the code on its own, so we don't really have to put a breakpoint over here. What we can do, we can put in a breakpoint right over here to see what random num does, or what kind of value this one is holding. All right, so that's that, that's that. Where else to put a breakpoint? I don't think there's any more inputs over here, are there? Console.log, it's a tie. Okay, so why do we need a debugger? So when there's a problem in your program, in order to solve that issue or solve that problem, in previous lectures you've seen with real life examples, to solve a problem, you need to debug the problem, right? So instead of debugging manually, writing console.log all over the place, we use a debugger to make our lives easier. Now about the breakpoint part. Oh, you were asking about the, right, the input part. Sorry, my bad. Thought you asked for the concept. So we use this debugger over here in order to take input from the debugging console. Does that make sense? So when debugging, debugger doesn't really recognize prompt. Debugger takes inputs on its own. And we didn't put a breakpoint over here because the debugger stops the code to take the input anyways, right? So we don't have to stop the code manually. Is that clear for everyone? Okay, let's go forward. I think that's about it. We could set a breakpoint over here actually to see what this line is doing, to see what the user score is after you add 1 to check the variables. And we can also add a breakpoint over here to see how many rounds we have left. Okay, so let's get to it. I will first, however, have to manually just start the code itself. Let's try it without that actually. Let's do this. Run and debug. Okay, so it is active. Now, if we see the variables, play is undefined, but because we didn't start the debugger yet, we just initialized it. Now, if I press play, you see the play button over here, or the play variable over here becomes true. Moving forward, let's see if any other variables over here changed. Did anything else change over here? No, right? Because so far in this code, we only had the play variable. Now, if I play again, we can see a lot more stuff. For example, what do we get to see? We get to see that the number of rounds left has been set to 5 and the user score is 0. Does that make sense for everyone so far? Are you following? Questions? Anyone? Any question? All right. Why replay is undefined? Because we did not yet go to the part or go to the variable replay yet. Where is replay over here? Replay is over here. Have we yet gone to that part replay? We have not, right? So the replay is undefined. We have not stored any value yet. Sorry, can you repeat? Of course I can. So I'll start from the top again. So over here, let's check out the variables first. Everything is undefined because did I start debugging yet? I did not. Now, if I press the continue button or the play button, whichever you call it, if I press this, it will go to the next breakpoint. Is that clear for everyone? Okay, so let's do that. Now, when we go to the next breakpoint, this line over here has already been run by the debugger. And once it has been run, you can see the value for play has been set to true. Is that clear for you? Okay. So if we play again, if we continue, over here now you see we only have the play button, right? The play variable. We have nothing else. But in the future, in the next few lines, we have the rounds left and user score as well. So let's continue and to the next breakpoint. As you can see over here, the number of rounds left have been set to 5 and the user score has been set to 0. All clear so far? Okay, so now if I continue, as you can see, the value for computer score has become 0 because it has been set as 0. That's clear? But now it's at the debugger line. And if you see in the debugging console, it's asking if we want to choose rock, papers, or scissors. So what do we do over here? We have to keep in mind what the name of the variable is. In this case, what's the name of the variable? Everyone, user input, correct? So let's try this out. User input is equal to, so we are essentially doing what? We're assigning the value to it. So let's say we want rock, correct? So now let's press enter. And let's see over here. I believe the value for user input should change right after I press continue. Here you see the value for user input has changed to what? Rock. Are step in, step out only used for functions? Yes, essentially these are only more required for functions, but for now we just need to kind of just play along. Okay, so everyone clear about the part where the value for rock user input is being changed to rock because I just inputted rock? Clear? Any questions? Okay. So assume no questions. So let's see this line now. So it has stopped us over here because I put a breakpoint because I want to see what the random number is. So far you can see random number is unidentified, right? Now if I press continue, you can see random number turns into true or 2. Forgot to speak. Sorry, that's my bad. But okay, so random number turns into 2. Now, if we see over here in the debug console where we are actually running the program, it says that I chose rock, computer chose scissor. So it's not the same. What is it going to do? It's going to ask us to do this again. So let's continue. And you see over here, the user wins this round. And it shows that user got 1 point and the computer got 0 points. Is that clear so far, guys? Okay. Now let's continue again. Let's see what it goes for. So since we are doing 5 tries, it's gonna ask us for 5 times till it's like a sort of stalemate. User input, oh God, sorry. User input equals to, say, this time I decided to choose, okay, let's choose paper now. Paper, okay? So you got how the first process worked. Now we are just reiterating it to see how it goes on and how the program ends. So I press play again. The random number over here, if you see on the side over here, it should change again. Actually, it stayed the same. I guess they chose the same number. Anyways, so if you see over here, back to the console, this round, I chose scissors. Oh, it didn't actually take in. My bad. Okay, that's because I just sent an empty string over there. That's why. But let's try it again. So computer won that round. Now let's continue again. So it's asking me for, so it's asking me for rock, paper, or scissor again. So let's try to change this. And so what I understand, every time you try to put in, you have to type it in again. So this is one of the drawbacks over here. We will try to come up with a solution for this, but for now, every time the console asks for an input, you have to type out the whole thing, or maybe just change the words over there. So let's continue. The value for a number did change to 1. If you see, random number over here, it changed to 1. And over here, computer chose paper. This is a bug over here. I don't know what's going on. Let me just restart this. Okay, everything should be the same. So it's gonna set play as true. It's gonna set user score and rounds left as 5. Now it's gonna take an input from us. So let's type it in. Let's type in user input is equal to, say, okay, let's go for paper this time. Paper. So I put in paper over here as user input. Let's continue. As you can see, the random number over here, it should change. But why did it not change? Because this line has not been run yet. So let's run it again. And over here, the random number changed to 1. Now, if we come back to the console to see how the output is going, over here, I chose paper, computer chose paper, so it's a tie. No one gets a point. Let's continue again. We have to send in an input. So let's go for user input. Guys, are you with me so far? Questions? Confusions? Okay. So now let's put in the user input as rock. I put in the user input as rock. Let's continue again. Over here, since I put a breakpoint, it's gonna check what the value for the random number is. So let's run this line. The random number becomes 0. So again, it's a tie because I chose rock, and since the random number is 0 over here, the computer will choose rock as well. So you guys can, for every single time you play the game, you can kind of see how the process is going on. So in this case, you see I chose rock. But since the random number over here was 0, in this if-else statement, when the random number is 0, what does the computer choose? Rock, correct? So you can kind of see the entire process based on the variables. That's the best part of the debugger over here. So let's continue now. Again, so let me choose user input as scissor. Okay, let's continue. Random number, keep an eye on that over here. So let's depager. I'm not sure. Are you talking about debugger, why we use it? We use it to take inputs. So you know how we used to use prompt to get inputs from user? Debugger gets its own input from us. For that, we have to use this debugger line over here. Exactly. It will not recognize it since S is missing. So regardless, let's go forward and see how it goes in the next line. As you can see, the random number remains the same over here. It did not change. So over here, the user wins this round since our input over here was not recognized. Or actually, it was not recognized because we did not have the S at the end. So let's continue. It's asking me to input something again. So let's try it out. User input is equal to, say, I choose rock again. So this time the user input is rock. I run it, random number changes to 2. I run it again. As you can see, I choose rock, computer choose scissor, and over here, I am leveled with the computer. So let's run it again. Let's run it again, and this time let's choose paper. Okay, so let's go for user input equals to paper. Now, same process, continue. You see, keep an eye on the random number. Over here, the random number does not change. The computer decides to stay the same. So over here, if you can see, I choose paper, computer chose scissors, so the computer won this round. Let's continue. Okay, that's error over here from my part. I have to fix something, but the idea remains the same. Do you guys understand how the debugger is actually working? Questions so far? Anyone? A little bit. I missed the beginning of the class, so I'll watch the recording. I mean, it makes your life easier whether you choose to use it or not. That's up to you. But it definitely makes it a lot easier for you when you're actually debugging. And it is actually recommended that you guys use a debugging tool when you're debugging your code, because when you're doing a very big program, it might get confusing. Got confused the last part. Which part did you get confused? Like, was it the part where I was putting in the inputs? Zobeda, I believe. Yeah, for lab, we are gonna do a few examples about this, and if you guys run into problems, I can definitely help you out. So it's how it's essentially working. Let me just give you a rough overview again. So I put in my breakpoints on line 7 because I want to run this and check the value. I want to see what the value of play is when I'm starting the while loop. I want to check the values of these two, rounds left and user score. I want to check the value of computer score as well. That's why I put a breakpoint over here. Now, again, I'll explain the debugger part. So you know how we input anything, essentially, a string or whatever, any user input goes through prompt when we're making the program, but the debugger doesn't really get to interact with the user. The debugger only interacts with us. So during debugging, we just take our inputs through the debugger and we just write down the word debugger after the variable that you want to store the value in. Does that make sense? I will definitely share this file. That's not a problem. Does that make sense so far, guys? I'm just giving a rough overview of what I did. So how can I see the variables? Over here, you can see on the left side under the variables column, all the variables are declared. So let me actually continue with this. So it's in this line now. If I continue, it's gonna run this line and go to this one. So you can see when this line when this line is run, it changes the value to true. Then when I continue it, it changes these variables to their assigned values. In this case, 5 and 0. If I continue it again, it's going to change the value for computer score to 0 as well because it's being assigned 0. Now, in this part, what the debugger is doing, it's stopping and letting us put an input. In this case, we have to put in rock, paper, or scissor. So for this, always remember, you are assigning it yourself. So just like code, you're going to write the name of the variable, input, and you are going to assign a string. In this case, let me assign it rock. So when I assign it, so where do you put debugger? You don't have to follow it up with anything because it's underneath the, yeah, exactly. So debugger doesn't interact with the user input. Debugger takes inputs from us. So we leave the variable, yeah, we leave the variable empty so that we can store something over there, or you could write whatever, it's going to override it anyway. Okay, so essentially we are using the debugger to put in the input as for the user. The user doesn't really interact with the debugger, okay? All right, so let's continue now to the next line. If you see, I put a breakpoint over here to check the value of this number, random num. Right now, random num does not have any value because we didn't store anything yet. But now if I play this, you see random num becomes 0 because the computer chose randomly 0 as its number. So coming back to the console, it now goes through the whole code or the whole process, and it gives you an answer where it shows that you chose rock, the computer also chose rock, so it's a tie. Now the user score is 0, the computer score is 0. And it keeps on going until the program ends. You have to keep on continuing again and again, again and again till you finish the program. Does that make sense for you guys? All right, great. That is wonderful. So if you guys don't have a problem in this now, let's take a 5-minute break. We are actually way over our break time, but let's take a 5 minutes break now and then regroup. And then we are gonna talk more about conditional statements, okay? Yes, of course I can. Just give me a second. I will upload this in Canvas. Till then, you guys relax because we have more about conditional statements coming. But conceptually, there's no problem, guys, is there? I just want to make sure before we go on our break that you guys don't have a problem in this. All right, perfect. So let's go on our break. I'll stop sharing my screen. And I'll upload this JS file, okay? All right, we are back. So let me just take a look into the conditionals again. So I did upload the debugger example on Canvas, so you guys can take a look into that after. But for now, let's proceed. Error while processing or retrieving document. Really? Okay, let me check that out. Just give me a second. Let me finish up the lecture and I'll upload both the files together, all right? Okay, so right now, what we're going to talk about is some more conditional statements. So far we have learned that if else and I believe someone has their mic on. Any questions? So if you can't really retrieve the document on Canvas, download it and try running it in VS Code. That should work as well, I think. But if not, do let me know. Anyways, so let me go forward with the lecture. So we're gonna talk a bit more about conditional statements. Let me just open up a new file. So today it's lecture 20. Okay. I believe someone has their mic on. Do you have any questions? Okay, so I'll go forward with the lecture. Now, what have we seen so far? We have talked about if-else statements, right? For conditionals. Now, there are other ways of writing conditional statements as well. For example, we have switch cases. What do you guys know about switch cases? Have you guys ever heard about it before? No, right? Okay, so we will take a look at it today. Can you see my screen? Okay. So we are gonna learn about switch cases. Switch cases. Exactly. So what it does, it essentially checks all the cases and sees which one matches with yours. So let's take an example, okay? Let's take this as an example. So if it is sunny, you will go for picnic. If it rains, you will watch a movie at home. And if it snows, you will pray it goes away. All right. So let's take a look at this. So now we have 3 different cases. Build a snowman. Yeah, you could do that. I just pray that it goes away. So, okay. Now, the thing is, Manitoba, yeah, it gets crazy with the snow. Okay, so let's get back to the example, all right? If it's sunny, you will go to the picnic. If it rains, you will watch a movie. If it snows, you will pray it goes away. So first, we have to see if the weather is sunny, if it's raining, or if it's snowing. So we will need to check the weather first, right? In order to do that, we will need a variable that kind of just holds the values for the weather. So for now, let's just set an empty variable called weather. Now, going forward, we have to set values for sunny, rainy, and snowy. So let's create variables for that as well. Sunny, for now, let's say sunny is equals to true. Okay. Let's use the command prompt over here. How about that? So let me just copy this part, Command C. Okay, let's take input from the user to see what the weather is. So essentially what this program is doing, it is telling the user what to do or suggesting the user what the user can do based on what the weather is like. So now let's take in this over here. So let's write prompt is it sunny or snowy or rainy? Okay, so this is what the prompt is gonna ask the user. Now, once it gets those answers, let's try to create something with this. So let's try to write a switch case over here.
Computer, turn off living room.
If you guys don't have any questions, it would be really appreciated if you have your microphone off, because that way the recording doesn't have any background noise. Okay, so now what's the syntax for a switch case? So we write down switch. Now, how it works is we check the variable weather for the user's output, correct? So this is how the syntax goes. So the beginning of the switch case starts with checking the variable that the user is passing the information into. All right. Now, for that particular variable or that particular instance, we have to match our cases and give the user a suggestion. So what will be case one? Let's say case one is, say, sunny. Okay? Say case one is sunny. What will we write? We'll write console.log and let's just write this over here. So one thing about switch cases, these are individual blocks, right? Well, okay, let's get to that later. Let's just write down all the cases first. So one case was it's sunny. What's the next case, guys? Snowing. So since I wrote here snowy, let's write down snowy over here. And for snowy, we write down console.log. You will watch a movie. Command C. Yeah, we can do that as well. We can do that as well. There should be a default one when none of the cases match. Yes, all right. I think you put in the wrong one. Great, thank you for catching that. Yeah, you will pray it goes away. So this is the next case that's done. What's the other case, the last one? It's rainy, right? And when it rains, we are supposed to watch a movie at home. Okay. Now, like someone in the chat said, whether we have any none of the above. Now, what if it's none of these? So in that case, we have a default, which will be console. We just write whatever you like. All right, so that's that. No, for this, it has to be default. Because this is the default answer if none of them go correct, right? So for now, after this, what do we do? Now, what you guys have to understand that each and every one of these cases are individual blocks. Spelling mistake. All right, okay. Okay, so each and every one of these cases are individual blocks, correct? Now, if you see, when we enter line 11, picnic. Looks like I can't spell. Okay, back to the concept. So as you can see, each and every one of these cases are individual blocks. So well, if the weather is sunny, it's gonna go in and check if what we are trying to display over here or what are the options we are trying to give to the user. And then it's just gonna stay there. but we can't really stay in line 11, right? We have to leave and finish the program. That's correct, right? So how do we get out of this block? Anyone? Any suggestions? Break, correct. This is not really a loop, but break can take you out of any block that you are stuck in, and it will take you to the rest of the code. So we use break for each and every single one of these over here. Okay. No, it's not like loop, it just stays there. In order to jump out of that part of the code, we have to use break. Does that make sense for you? It essentially does nothing. It just stays there after printing.
If we did not write break, it will not go by default outside of the switch.
No, you have to write break in order for it to go out of the switch case.
But if I did not write it, it's gonna happen again and again and again.
No, it's just gonna print one time and just stay there. That's
Okay.
it.
Okay.
So switch cases for if-else statements, if you remember, we use it for like one or the either conditions, where you're doing this or you're doing that. But in a scenario like this, where there are multiple options and multiple results, for cases like those, we use switch cases. For example, the whole thing over here, it couldn't just be one if-else statement, right? There had to be multiple if-else statements for this to work. But using a switch case makes it much smaller and neat. Does that make sense for you, Salva?
I'm not sure, Tasneem, because with else if statements, there are multiple conditions as well.
There are, but the thing is, like, for else if statements, it's either this or that. So you have to use a lot of if else statements in order to get to your output, right? But for this, if you see, you're just creating one case for each scenario and you're done.
Okay.
But for if-else statements, you'd have to create nested if-else statements, and it gets kind of complicated at one point. So just to make it easier and smoother, does this make it's less lines to read, right?
Yeah.
So
Okay, so
that's,
it's just to get a cleaner code, but
yeah,
essentially we have the option to do both.
yeah, you have the option to do
Okay.
both.
Okay, thank you.
Can I combine two cases together? Um, not not necessarily, no. You can't really combine two cases together like that. You can use another switch case inside this if you want. You can create nested switch cases, but each case is different from one another, okay? So let's try to run this code. Let me go to terminal, new terminal. So I think I have to install prompt sync. Oh God, what happened to my spelling today? Install prompt sync. Okay, there you go. Prompt sync is installed. Now let's try to run this code. I mean, rainy or sunny, combine two conditions. Yeah, that you can do. You can combine rainy or sunny, but then rainy or sunny has to be under one case. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So node, and I have what, lecture 20. Okay, so is it sunny or snowy or rainy? Now let's just type in any. Let's go for sunny, okay? So if you see, when it's sunny, we go for picnic. Let's try it again. Now let's go for something random, okay? Let's say, it's just gloomy outside. It's not raining. If it's gloomy, you can do whatever you like. Do you guys get the idea of what's going on over here? So if either of these conditions match, it will print the respective activity. If it doesn't match any of these three, it's gonna go for the default one, which is you can do whatever you like. Does that make sense, everyone? I like this much better than else if statements. Yeah, else, I mean, all of these have their own uses. Sometimes when you're just doing one simple operation where you're just writing either this or that, then if else is a good option. But when it becomes more complicated, switch cases are also easy to use. Any confusions with switch cases, anyone? If not, we have one small concept to cover, but conditional statements as well. Can we add a condition to print two cases if a condition is met? I mean, if you name both of them the same, then likely both of them are going to print. But that's not really the purpose of switch cases, having two cases with the same name. Ideally, you would like to have each case different from each other. Make sense, guys? Okay, so let us proceed.
Sorry, Tasneem, I have a question, if you
Yeah,
don't
for
mind.
sure. Go ahead.
I believe it was Sundus, she mentioned that we can put sunny or rainy.
Yeah, for that,
Okay.
remember how for if-else statements, we used to write conditions? You can do the same for switch cases as well.
Okay, would you be able to give us an example of that?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Okay. To think of it, can you actually do it like that? Oh, actually, no. For that, you can't really use that because it just returns true or false. That will not be possible for this. If you want to check if it's sunny or rainy, you'll have to put in a case where it checks whether it's sunny or rainy, and then you have to write down an if-else statement. For example, say, okay, let's say this is sunny or rainy. There's no limit to how many cases you can put per switch. So yeah, for sunny or rainy, you have to write down your own condition over here like this. And the user has to enter sunny or rainy, and then only this case will get activated. Does that make sense?
Yes, Tasneem, sorry, I misunderstood. I thought we had the option to print two statements for sunny or rainy, but it's just the one, right? That you will
It's
go
just
for
the one.
picnic.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. All right.
It's just the one. So essentially, whatever you enter in this variable has to match this. Does that make sense for you guys?
One quick question, if you
Yeah.
please, Tasneem. Here you put it between double quotation because we are looking for a string.
Exactly, because yeah, the user is entering a string and we have to compare two strings.
So you should like write sunny between double quotation, then or outside of the double quotation, then rainy in another double quotation. You know what I mean?
No, that won't really work over here because cases don't really check for this or that. Cases just strictly match whether the variable is the same as the case name. It's
Okay. What
essentially
about
it's essentially like a file system, right? So you search for file with your name. It's just gonna check for the same name in that case and just bring out that file. Does that make sense?
yes, yes. Also, if I'm looking or I'm gonna match integer number or float, whatever, like numeric numbers, I
Yeah.
should also put it between double quotation.
No, for that, just this maybe.
Okay, 9, for example, or 5, let's say.
Yeah,
I
whatever. 5 also works.
okay, got it. Like
So
no,
essentially,
I can combine also two condition or two cases at the same time, like 5 or 9 without double quotation.
no, the thing is like this variable has to match this. If you're putting in 9, you have to put 9. If you're putting in 5, you have to put 5.
Like for example, if the number it's 5 or 9, I will print that sentence, let's say.
Okay, so for that, this has to, so essentially what's going on is this variable has to match this. So for that, you could just write this down under double quotation as 5 or 9,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and then the user enters if it's 5 or 9, something like that.
Oh, so if it's numeric, I can combine two conditions together.
Now you can put it under cases, like you can use or, but I'm not trying to go that complex right now because I have to cover another concept over here. But
No.
let me just give you an example. Like if you do want to go for that or part, you could just do this. Okay, so you put in rainy or
Oh, okay, got it.
sunny. Let's try it out, okay?
Okay.
And let's cut this part off. So yeah, this is like the conditional part. Do you want to go into that deep right now? But I just hope you guys don't have a problem with what I wrote down over here. Do you guys understand what's going on in the condition? Okay, so let's try to run this now, okay? Node lecture 20. So is it snowy? Let's write it's sunny. Hmm. Just shows an error. Just give me a sec. Yes, let's debug. Yeah, as you can see, it is not showing the correct one. It did not check the first case. So now what's the issue over here? You guys tell me, what do you think? You guys think it's the bracket? So yeah, over here, Alim said it wants to save time on evaluation and it only checks first. So, okay, let's not go that deep right now because I want to cover the other concept too. Let's get back to this about the conditional part. Let's just make sure we understand the individual parts over here. And we will get into the conditional parts later. Does that make sense for you guys? Okay. So I have one more small concept that I have to cover today, which is so switch cases, essentially think of it like a file management system, sort of. You know how you pull out a file based on a name? So when you enter a name, it just checks for that file under that name and pulls out that file, something like that. Okay. So now let's go for a new topic, which is called ternary operators. These are also used as conditional statements. Okay, so is switch cases clear for you guys? All right, so let's go forward to ternary operations. Now, this actually simplifies if-else statements into just one single line. So let me give you an example, right? Say I have to write if, say, okay, let me give you an example with operations. I have a question. Can these cases be used only for string type? Can you put them? Yes, you can put them as numbers as well. I believe I showed that too. You could, instead of the quotation mark and all that, just write down the number. That's it. Or you could just write down a variable carrying a number. That works too. Okay, so back to it now. Ternary operators. Before we get into the actual syntax for that, let's write down a if-else statement for it, okay? Let A equals to 3, let B equals to 9. Okay? Now, if we have to write a if-else statement to say which one is greater, say if A is greater than B, we write down let's console.log wrong, because A is equals to 3 and B is equals to 9. So it cannot be correct, right? Now, if it's the other way around, if it's, say, else, actually, I think this would make more sense to you guys. Let's write it like this. 3 and this as 9. Okay. This is 9 is greater than 3. Else we can write, say, this is just an example. So there are more aspects to it. So let's just console that it's wrong if it's not. Okay. All right. So now if I try to run this node lecture 20. Sunny, whatever. Okay, so over here you can see since A is actually greater than B, it prints this 9 is greater than 3. Now you can see it takes about what, line 33 to line 39. Takes about like 6-7 lines to write this down. What if we wanted to do it in just one line? Let's try it out, okay? So how do we do it? Let's take a variable over here. Let result is equal to, okay. So over here, what we are doing, we are assigning the result of whatever the condition is into this variable over here. Now, before we assign the result, we need to write down the condition. In this case, what's the condition? Guys, A is greater than B, right? So that's the condition. So after that, we write a question mark because that is the condition. Am I correct? Moving forward, now our condition is set. Now we're checking if A is greater than B. Now if A is greater than B, then what do we write? We write this, which is 9 is greater than 3. Okay, that's the first one. Now, what if this one's not the correct one and A is not actually equal to B? Then we put in a colon and write down the other condition, which is wrong. Is this part clear for everyone so far? So what are we doing? We're storing whatever the result for this condition is in this variable over here. In this case, if we're checking if A is greater than B, if A is greater than B, then we store it in result. But if it is not greater than B, we store wrong in result. So let's console.log result. See, it just makes it easier and more neat. Now let's print result. Okay, so as you can see, for the first one also it shows 9 is greater than 3, and the second one also it shows 9 is greater than 3. So you get the same answer, but it just takes one line. Actually, if you add the console too, it adds 2 lines, but the main function or the main work that's going on is in line 42. Can we change the numbers? For sure we can change the numbers. Let's say this is 9 and this is 3. Let's try it out. Node. Can you explain line 42 again? Definitely. Let me just run this and show you guys what the wrong answer is. So you see now for the if statement, it shows wrong. For the ternary operator, it also shows wrong. Okay, line 42. So the whole idea is we are gonna check if A is greater than B. Does this part make sense? We're checking A greater than B. Why the question mark? Because it's actually a question, right? We're checking if A is greater than B. Now, if A is greater than B, we go for the first option, which is this statement over here, that 9 is greater than 3. Is so far clear, Habiba? Okay, so that's the first option. Now then, in order to separate it from the next option, we put a colon and we write the next option, which is wrong. And whatever the result is, regardless, in this case over here, since A is not greater than B, the answer is stored as wrong because that's how we programmed it. And over here it shows wrong. It shows the same for if and this. Does it make sense? Yeah, each and every one of them, they have their own uses. If you, yeah, I would say for ternary operations, not just so that it doesn't get complicated, make sure when you're using it, you use it for cases where you don't have to put another condition inside. So essentially you use it for one condition, but you can use it for more. It's not a restriction. It's just we have 3 different kinds of conditional statements and they are used for different purposes. Also, so if you guys do have questions about the syntaxes of anything that we have learned so far, loops, if statements, conditional statements, whatever, we have uploaded a JavaScript documentation on Canvas under Tools and Technologies. So if you have any questions, you can definitely refer to that while you're practicing. But so far, so good. Any questions about this? So
Sorry,
yeah,
Tasneem, can you
yeah,
repeat that? Where is it uploaded again?
on Canvas under Tools and Technologies.
Tools and technologies. Okay, thank you.
But
And can you please copy and paste this into the chat?
yeah, for
So
sure.
thank you.
Not a problem. I mean, I'm gonna upload the whole thing again anyways, but I'll just do it. Guys, any questions so far? So the result isn't really a condition. Result is the variable that stores the condition or that stores the result of the condition. Yeah, like Sanders said, go to Canvas, modules, then tools. All right, guys, any more questions? Because I think we are at the end of today's lecture. So what have we learned? We've learned about debuggers, we've learned about switch cases, and we've learned about ternary operations. Now, I will ask you this. What do you think about all these conditional statements? Does having different kinds of conditional statements make it easier to code or make it more confusing? Yes, Salva, you have a question?
No, it's an answer to your question. I think it's good to have options, especially because we all have different preferences. As a beginner, I am finding it a little bit confusing to determine when to use switch cases as opposed to if else. So I guess that'll come with practice. But it would be nice to have like a rule of thumb of, okay, this is when you use this and this is when you use this, especially if we're starting off.
You know what the thing is? It's like all of these can be used for multiple purposes, but that's why we don't really say that this is used for this, that is used for that. But all of them do have their separate uses, and honestly, people find their own uses based on their style of coding. So when you're actually making bigger programs, bigger projects, you'll kind of get used to it. Right now, we're just
Right.
kind of giving you examples for each and every one of them, kind of laying out the structure, but
Mm.
how you use the tools is kind of up to you. And based on
Right.
that, you can choose any, honestly. Like, for
Okay,
example,
so
yeah,
I
you
was
go
gonna
ahead.
say, so it doesn't matter the path you take as long as we reach the same destination, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
It does not matter, but then again, it's also like in order to make codes more efficient, we try to use as less lines as possible.
right.
So using these ternary operations or switch cases sometimes make your life easier. For
Okay.
example, when it gets too messy with nested ifs, you can think of using either of these operations and maybe it fits. So you always
Hmm.
have to check where it fits.
Right.
It always comes with practice. You're correct about that for sure. But yeah, these are some tools that you have in your arsenal and you can use them
Hmm.
whenever you like or whenever you see fit.
Okay. Thank you, Tasneem.
No problem.
I have a comment. I noticed I was looking for the debugging
Hmm.
example, and I noticed that it's uploaded under Friday. So I just wanted to let everyone know in case they can't find it under Tuesday on
Oh no,
Canvas.
I just uploaded it for now. We haven't really rearranged those yet. We're still
Oh,
kind
okay.
of doing it right now. But
Okay.
it is uploaded. We just have to drag and drop it. That's it.
Thank you.
Any other questions, guys? I don't really know when to use them. The thing is like, if you're confused about when to use which, don't worry too much about that. We will be solving bigger problems in the coming classes. And as we do that, it's gonna be a much more clear for you guys on when to use which. Can you use more than one? For this, I believe it's like if else, right? So it has to be one colon. So it's this or that. Just like if else statements, it's this or that. And you can, just like if else statements where you have nested if else statements, you can have nested ternary operations as well. Questions, guys? Questions? But I understand like there's a little confusion about when to use which, but is the concept clear for you guys? That's what I need to know right now. All right, as long as the concept's clear. Yeah, like I said, with coming examples or more projects that you guys will be doing, you'll find it a bit more clear about when to use which. All right, so that being said, let's finish our lecture right now and go on a 10-minute break. And we'll come back and I believe the lab assignments are already uploaded on the Canvas. How to close debugging tool. Okay, let me just show that real quick. So over here, as you see, the debugging tool is running. Okay, come on. Okay. So you see this small square on the side? This one, if you just press it, it disconnects. Is that clear for you guys? All right, if that's done, we can go on our 10 minutes break and we'll come back and talk more about the lab activity, right? All right. Okay, so today your lab activity will be essentially kind of just, if you see on Canvas, we uploaded a .js file. What you do, you download that and you make necessary adjustments. So today we're kind of focusing on debugging. You kind of make necessary adjustments using the debugger tool. Check out where the problem is, and then you make the necessary edits and upload that JS file to your assignment. Does that make sense? Okay, if that's all good, you guys start. And if any questions, just raise your hands, all right?
Tasneem,
Yes, hi.
if we have any questions regarding the previous lab assignment, so the blackjack game, would this be a good time to ask, or is there an allocated time for that?
So we do expect you to do this lab activity for the rest of
Okay.
the time that's left, because this one's also a little time consuming. I mean,
Okay.
we do have office hours every day. You could join that, but if it's like a small question, I don't mind helping you out with that. But I would suggest like kind of focus on
Mhm.
this right now.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No worries. Yes, Samina, you have a question?
Yes, I did not quite follow the debugger, how to start. Because the instructions that you gave, I was doing those, but I was getting stuck in where the variables were listed. So sometimes they would not. I had to keep running, but it would not. It would just pop up for a moment and then would disappear.
Did
So
you set the breakpoints for where you
yeah,
want code to stop?
yeah, I did.
Then can you share your screen? Then we can check it out.
Oh, okay, so let me just open another one.
Open up the example that I gave in
The
class.
debugger example. Okay, okay. Let me do that. And let me share my screen. Share screen. Is it? Share screen. No. What is the computer screen? I don't know whether you'll be able to see. Share. To select two steps. I don't know how to share it. Can you see it?
I can't.
You can't.
You should be able to share it the same way you did before. Like go to share screen and just select which window you want to share.
Yeah, this is another one, another computer. So just allows them to share open system preferences. Just give me a moment. Oh, it's asking me to leave the meeting because oh boy.
Oh, I'm guessing to change like the Zoom settings, you have to exit Zoom and then come back. Or
Yeah. Because this is the other computer, so I think the settings are different. Maybe I can do it later. Hold on. No, I cannot change. Hold on. I'll have to exit. Give me a moment. I'll be back.
Yeah, no worries.
sounds good.